In the heart of the American Southwest, cut into the landscape, stands a majestic canyon. It has amazed, inspired, and puzzled historians and archaeologists for generations. Every year, thousands flock to behold this incredible rock formation. Nope, not the Grand Canyon, the Chaco Canyon. In this episode, we'll be exploring the Hohokam and Ancestral Puebloans of the Southwest Borderlands, two indigenous cultures that turn this fiercely challenging land into a thriving cultural center. In the previous episode, we discussed how history is constantly changing as we gather new evidence and challenge our old theories. Let's keep that in mind as we challenge a few ideas right off the bat. First, we have to keep in mind that we don't know everything about the past. If we did, there wouldn't be much of a need for historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists. Next, although we are far more knowledgeable about these cultures now than we were even 30 years ago, there's still quite a bit that we just don't know. Like the fact that we don't even know what these people called themselves, if anything. Their names were given to them by Europeans and other indigenous people, which is almost certainly not what they would have called themselves. For example, Hohokam is a Pima term meaning exhausted or all used up, and likely refers to the land rather than the people. It would be like if in thousands of years, American ruins of Yankee Stadium were discovered, and as a result, American civilization was named the baseball people. Or if based on the fact that the Hohokam left behind their own ball courts, we simply called them the ball court people. A description like that probably doesn't capture the scope and complexity of the culture as a whole. When we are faced with unknowns about the past, the best we can do is look at the evidence we have and try to interpret it, while also, of course, looking for more evidence. The cultures we'll be studying in this video almost certainly traded with one another and collaborated across whatever boundaries historians have drawn up hundreds of years later. All that said, let's explore the indigenous peoples of the Southwest Borderlands. I'm Dr. Danielle Bainbridge, and this is Study Hall, U.S. History to 1865. As way back as 2000 BCE, several different communities developed in what would become the American Southwest. Let's take them one at a time and see how they shaped the region. The Hohokam built a society that lasted far longer than the United States has so far, and they did so in a region with little water, little wood, and little vegetation, the region between the Salt and Gila rivers in what is now Arizona. From those rivers, the population stretched north into central Arizona and as far south as modern Tucson. Between 750 and 1375 CE, the Hohokam developed into a mostly sedentary culture. A sedentary culture is one that stays in one place for an extended period of time, as opposed to a nomadic culture that often moves around from season to season, usually in search of food sources. And it takes a lot of work to stay in one place. A population generally needs to be able to farm or develop a constant source of food in one location. This means setting up not just a farm, but buildings to keep the food, houses for the farmers to live in, and roads to connect houses to farms. So how did the Hohokam develop a sedentary culture in the desert, hundreds of years before modern plumbing and air conditioning? They dug. Not to get closer to groundwater, but to bring water closer to them. The Hohokam people took full advantage of their location by the Salt and Gila rivers, constructing extensive irrigation canals that fed fresh water into their settlements. This irrigation system was a true engineering marvel, and by 1300, some 110,000 acres were irrigated by canals built by the Hohokam people. The canals allowed the Hohokam people to become, in the words of one archaeologist, masters of the desert. The Hohokam irrigation system is the largest pre-Columbian irrigation system anywhere in North or Central America. With a big fresh water supply, the Hohokam developed a thriving agricultural society in the heart of a desert. And the surplus of food allowed the Hohokam to settle down and develop residential communities. Some of those residential communities were inhabited for over 1,000 years. For those keeping score at home, that's about 4 times as long as the United States has existed as a country. There is also little evidence of armies or serious conflict amongst the Hohokam. This is an intriguing idea because many traditional arguments claim that complex societies are sustained through hierarchy and military power. The theory goes that societies advance in predictable stages. We start at stage 1, with early hunter-gatherer communities, who are thought to be small, egalitarian, and without need of any hierarchy. Then, once that hunter-gatherer community settles down, personal ownership increases. This creates inequality among the people with a lot of valuable possessions versus those without. Because of that, a warrior class is also needed to keep everyone in line. And then a community needs someone to make sure the warrior class is paid, and someone else to make sure that the treasurer isn't breaking any rules, and then someone to establish what the rules are. Some indigenous cultures, like the populations that we'll explore later on, appear to have developed in this way. More modern theories of social progression argue that hierarchy can and did exist in small hunter-gatherer communities, just as it can be completely missing from complex sedentary cultures like the Hohokam. This brings us to one of the biggest historical discoveries in the region. If the Hohokam people were able to develop a sedentary culture in Arizona, how'd they get there in the first place? In the mid-20th century, most historians concluded that the Hohokam culture developed in prehistoric Mexico, and then as people migrated north into Arizona, settling around 750 CE. In the 1990s, though, archaeologist Stephanie Whittlesey and several other historians and archaeologists unearthed evidence that completely challenged that hypothesis. What Whittlesey and the others discovered were the remains of the Hohokam's ancestors that had settled the Salt and Gila rivers as early as 2000 BCE. This discovery meant that the Hohokam hypothesis, arguing people migrated north from Mexico, was simply false. Because of that, historians had to change their entire theory of where the Hohokam came from. We'll get to what historians think happened to the Hohokam in just a minute, but what we do know is that none of these large population centers were still around by the time of European contact in the 16th century. Even still, the physical evidence of the Hohokam remained, and millions rely on it today, whether they realize it or not. Remember those canals? Well, some were incorporated into the modern water supply system, helping bring water to millions in central Arizona. In addition to the Hohokam, the Ancestral Puebloans also dominated the Southwest Borderlands from 700 to 1130 CE. The cultural center of Ancestral Puebloan society was Chaco Canyon. Sprawling north and west of Hohokam, the Ancestral Puebloans were situated around the four corners of present-day Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. Unlike their neighbors the Hohokam, the Ancestral Puebloans did not participate in large-scale farming and canal building. Instead, the culture relied on rain, and as a result, emphasized rain as sacred, and even developed rituals to bring in that rain. But the Ancestral Puebloans in Chaco Canyon did share one common trait with the Hohokam. They were not nomads. That's because Chaco Canyon is not quite like the idea of a canyon we often think of, and nothing like that other lesser-known Grand Canyon in Arizona. Chaco Canyon was a city. And not only that, but Chaco Canyon resembled a modern city. By the 11th century, Chaco Canyon was the economic and social heart of the region. Massive stone structures called great houses dominated the city. These buildings stretched multiple stories, and some, like Pueblo Bonito, contain upwards of 600 rooms. And by all indications, these buildings were planned from the start, taking decades, if not centuries, to construct. Over 150 of these great houses were connected by hundreds of miles of roads, spanning throughout the region, and the houses were situated around lunar and solar markers, likely requiring generations of astronomical record keeping. All of this evidence shares one thing in common. It's purely visual. Now let's go back to our baseball analogy. If we found the ruins of Yankee Stadium, we could tell how many people could fit inside, the roads that led to it, maybe the type of incredibly tasty food one can only get at ballparks, but it wouldn't tell us much else in any concrete way. How would we know that there were luxurious box seats for people to come and not watch the game? How do we know that the team's biggest rival was all the way in Boston? Without any additional evidence, we probably wouldn't. At Chaco Canyon, we could look at a house and measure its stories and rooms, note the presence of roads, and match the placement of buildings to stars in the sun. But the why still puzzles us today. What was Chaco Canyon's purpose? And to answer that question, we often need more than just visual evidence. In that case, historians can also turn to oral tradition and textual evidence. Textual evidence is exactly what it sounds like. Someone wrote down what was happening as it was happening. And as historians, we have to determine how accurate the record is, which, yeah, that's not always easy. Textual evidence could be as simple as a written family tree or a complex Egyptian myth carved in hieroglyphics. But because these particular cultures we're looking at had no written language that we know of, oral tradition rather than textual evidence is one of the primary tools in our tool belt. Oral tradition is knowledge of the past that is passed down through the generations by word of mouth. Instead of a written family tree, you might hear your grandma tell stories about her spoiled cousins at a family reunion. That's oral tradition. Because it requires no written language, oral tradition is a much older way of recording history than textual evidence. And sometimes, these different methods of recording history contradict each other, and that's okay. For example, oral tradition from the descendants of the Chaco people remember the canyon as a gathering place where people from all over came together to share common ceremonies. And the archaeological evidence suggests that Chaco Canyon was an economic center where domestic turquoise was traded for trinkets and commodities from elsewhere. But the fact that the city was planned around the sky suggests a certain religious importance to Chaco Canyon. So, which was it? All of it? None? A little of each? The best we can do is piece together the truth based on these bits of oral tradition, archaeological evidence, and textual history we have left behind. And that is the historian's job. So what exactly happened to Hohokam and the Ancestral Puebloans? How did two of the Southwest's most complex cultures disappear from the land and, unfortunately, from most history books? Was it war? Was it a climate catastrophe? For a while, scholars thought there must have been some immediate disaster that struck the Southwest. And modern analysis of tree rings do show evidence of drought and excessive rainfall, which could have crushed the Ancestral Puebloans' food supply and strained the Hohokam irrigation systems. But more recent studies suggest that the end was actually centuries long and a result of climate change and civilization decline rather than instant destruction. Regardless, the where did they go question overlooks one big fact. While the Hohokam and Ancestral Puebloans have gone away, their descendants have not. Today, several indigenous peoples, such as the Tohono O'odham and the Pueblo, count the Hohokam and Ancestral Puebloans as ancestors, dancing, praying, and speaking in the same way as their predecessors. The region is populated by the Apache and Navajo, who migrated to the area after the decline of the Hohokam and Ancestral Puebloans. So we tend to think that these peoples are lost forever to history, and maybe some aspects of their culture have disappeared forever. But we should keep in mind that their descendants are just as much a part of the present as they are the past. And there's still a huge amount we just don't know, and a lot of work left to be done to learn more, just like our friends, the baseball people. Thanks for watching Study Hall U.S. History to 1865, which is part of the Study Hall project, a partnership between ASU and Crash Course. If you like this video and want to keep learning with us, be sure to subscribe. You can learn more about Study Hall and the videos produced by Crash Course and ASU in the links in the description. See you next time.